Thank you for joining me today for Culturally Responsive Teaching. My name is Jami Hitt, and I am the instructional coach at our middle school. Today's training comes from a training I attended at Region 10 titled Culturally Responsive Coaching. I would encourage you to open a new window or even use a separate device and open the actual Google slide presentation with this bit.ly, or you can simply use your QR scanner and scan here, and it will take you directly to the slide presentation. There are live clicks throughout the slide presentation that will allow you to participate in this training, giving me some feedback and providing some experiences besides looking at each slide. There are embedded links that will be beneficial to you throughout the training. I'm sure if you chose to attend culturally responsive teaching, you probably have some ideas already about what that entails. Here's some misconceptions about culturally responsive teaching. It's only for those with low self-esteem. It's just about social justice or perhaps injustice. It's about classroom management. It's about hip hop or maybe about TikTok. It's just a mystery or it's a gimmick. Throughout today's training, I hope to address some of these misconceptions as we work through our goals for today. And the goals for today, the content objective is that you will determine why culture is an important factor to consider when designing your instruction, what is culturally responsive pedagogy, and how to implement a culturally responsive framework. There are some embedded links to some activities where you will have an opportunity to write to reflect on your own cultural identity and consider the cultural implications on behavior and instruction. So as we begin today's training, there will be points throughout where I will ask you to pause this video recording of this professional development session and actually go to the Google slide presentation to access some Google links. So this is at one point where that will happen. So you will pause this presentation and view the video presented by Dr. Rios, where he explains his experiences and how he did ultimately achieve success, although he was an at-risk student. There are two questions to consider during his presentation. What was unique about his relationship with Mrs. Russ? And how can outward perceptions affect teachers' opinions of students and vice versa? You will notice in the bottom left corner, there is a Socrative quiz link. At the conclusion of the video on your own Google slide link, if you will click Socrative quiz, it will take you to a link where you'll have the opportunity to answer that second question. So at this time, if you will pause this video recording and move to your Google Slides presentation to watch the video and answer the question. And when you are ready, go ahead and continue with this video and we will continue through our professional development session. Thank you for sharing your views on how our perceptions affect our teaching. I look forward to reading those in the Socrative application that you answered the question in. Right here, what you see, the title is Region 10 Ethnic Distribution, and it's a side-by-side analysis of the ethnic distribution among teachers at Region 10 versus that among students in the Region 10 area. I also have gathered some information about Wills Point's ethnic distribution among teaching staff, as well as the ethnic distribution among our students. You will notice that I did bold the Hispanic numbers because much like Region 10, we're disproportionate in our teaching staff to our student in terms of the cultural experiences. So while only 4.8% of our teachers would designate themselves as Hispanic, we have 25.3% of student population. In addition to the ethnicity, there are other factors that affect our students, those being English learners, our economically disadvantaged, our SPED population, as well as our at-risk, or rather, our at-promise students. Now, we do have some in our staff who are designated to serve those special populations. But if you look at the number or the percentage of staff designated to serve our English learners or our special education students, they're quite disproportionate to the number of students that actually fall into those categories. So, as you already know, all educators have to educate all populations of our students in order to give them the best opportunity to be successful. Okay, this is a quote from Dr. Art Markman. He is a doctor of psychology and marketing, and he's a professor at the University of Texas at Austin. He's written several books, and this is his quote about culturally responsive teaching. A person who has immersed themselves in another culture has the openness and cognitive flexibility to make your organization more creative. And there's a link, you will see a link at the bottom right of the screen, which will explain his thoughts on why multicultural experiences lead to more creative students, learners, and workers. Now, it could be argued that cultural responsiveness is not a practice. It's what informs our practice so we can make better choices for eliciting, engaging, motivating, supporting, and expanding the intellectual capacity of all of our students. And there were surveys performed among executives in the workforce, and they were given the opportunity to explain what the top skills they were looking for in employees. And of those 343 executives that were surveyed, 72% of those said critical thinking and problem solving are top skills. Right behind that, collaboration and teamwork. And right behind that, communication. So if those are the skills executives are looking for, and if students who have multicultural experiences tend to be more creative, then they're actually going to be a tremendous asset for our workforce. And while I was going through this and preparing for this session, I couldn't help but go back and think about the Wills Point learning experience, which many of us have worked on and continue to work on. We've been working on it over 3 years now. And the very skills that these top executives say are the most important in prospective employees, critical thinking and problem solving, collaboration and teamwork, communication, those are all skills that were identified by our Wills Point community and district as being very important for us to instill in graduates. So that gives me a lot of satisfaction to know that we're completely on the right track. Some of the soft skills that were determined during this same time of survey were creativity, persuasion, collaboration, adaptability, and time management. And I will let you take a moment to check out the most in-demand hard skills. Obviously, many of those are technical, and those technical skills are extremely important. But if you read a little deeper, what you're seeing there is the ability to problem solve, the ability to think critically, and the ability to communicate and lead others. Translation being one on the list, very important. I have always felt as an educator that it was very important to give my students the opportunity to use and practice and remain proficient in their native language, and always took a moment to explain to them how much more valuable that would make them in the workforce moving forward. This is what I mentioned a moment ago, the Wills Point Learner Experience, and the learner profile skills over here are very much in line with those skills that top executives are looking for today in employees. And they're also very much in line with skills that our multicultural students tend to already be very good at, which is very encouraging news. Okay, speaking of the Wills Point Learning Experience and Wills Point in general, I'd like you to take a moment and consider two things. Number one, in your experience with your students here, what are some of the strengths that you see in our students, and how can we build on those strengths? Secondly, what are some of the challenges or opportunities for growth for your students? And what activities and what things have you put in place in your classroom that encourage growth in both of those areas? So at this time, you will stop this presentation. You will go to your tab with the Google Slides. You'll simply click on the pad here, and it will open the Padlet. You'll click the plus sign, which you'll find in the bottom right corner, and you'll add your thoughts on these two areas. And when you've completed the Padlet, answering those two questions to the best of your ability, which I look forward to reading, you'll simply come back to this presentation and continue on with this session of PD. Thank you for taking a moment to complete those questions about strengths and opportunities for growth in that Padlet. That Padlet is really cool because everyone who accesses this training will have the opportunity to see the answers you've provided, and they may find that you share an idea that is particularly helpful in their classroom. I always think we learn best from one another. Our most valuable resources are our people and our ability to share with one another. Okay, this quote is from Elise Trumbull, and Elise Trumbull is a former elementary school teacher. She's the author of some books. One of her books is called Bridging Cultures Between Home and School, and it serves as a guide for teachers. And this is the quote I have is, "We define culture as a system of values, beliefs, and ways of knowing that guide communities of people in their daily lives." If you'd like to hear more from Elise Trumbull, there is a link to an audio recording right on this screen, and that will give you a little more information about how she came to believe that quote. Okay, culture is very interesting because culture could be described similarly to an iceberg where we only see 10% of the culture, but the vast majority of the culture lies under the surface. So within the surface, the part we see is anything tangible. That's the food we eat, the music we listen to, the art we enjoy, the language we speak. Moving on, we have shallow culture, and that's right under the surface. You may not necessarily see that, but it will begin to become apparent. Values we have, our religious beliefs, the rules we think are most important, what we think of as beautiful or what we think of as not beautiful. But moving down deeper into the deep culture, you get into ethics, you get into what are the views on raising children, what approach to problem solving do we have, how do we view time, what is important in our culture. There is a link on this particular slide that will actually, I have a printout. I don't want to take time to go to the link, but the printout will show you a lot of items that fall within the surface culture, the shallow culture, and the deep culture. The next slide is also a similar representation, but instead of the iceberg, it uses a tree. The parts you see versus the parts you don't see. And I think as educators, the tangible items at the surface, those are the ones that we understand and we can deal with. Their language differences, the music, the food they like to eat. The shallow culture, those are things we can easily learn. How do they view personal space? How do they show respect? Why will a child not look at me? They could have a different belief as far as what eye contact represents. Where in some cultures, it's not good to make eye contact. And then under the surface in the deep culture is their decision-making processes, what they think of as fair, what type of culture is deemed as more better than another type of culture. What is a definition of a family? So those all lie under deep culture. So we've already discussed each one very briefly, but the surface culture, those things aren't going to be, those won't be emotional. Low emotional charge, they're concrete, they're observable. They're things you could say, I see this, I know this. The shallow cultures, the rules that might not be known by us might be unspoken. You may see a different behavior that may not portray what we think it portrays. It may be a cultural element rather than a behavior problem. Rapport and trust is developed in the shallow culture. And then when you get to the deep culture, these are unconscious assumptions. These are concepts of good and bad. It's how we learn new information. It's whether we're going to stay and fight or we're going to run from something. This is deep culture. Okay, we all fall under one of two cultural archetypes, and the one you fall under may surprise you. I know mine surprised me. So this is going to be one of those points where I'm going to ask you to stop this video recording and go into your actual Google slide presentation. And on this slide, which is number 23 at this point, there is a live link to a quiz. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to stop, take the quiz, and when you're ready to proceed, just come back to this video recording and move forward with the training. I hope you enjoyed taking the quiz. I know when I took the quiz that I fell under one of the two archetypes, and it did surprise me. It wasn't the one I expected to fall under. If you were an individualistic culture, you are known for your uniqueness, autonomy, your self-sufficiency, and your independence. There is a link embedded here, so if you want to know more about individualistic cultures, feel free to click on that. If you fell under the collectivistic culture, then social rules focus on promoting selflessness. You tend to want to work as a group. You do what's best for the whole group rather than your individual self. And families and communities have a central role. And likewise, for more information, you can click anywhere on this slide, and it will take you to more information about the collectivistic culture. Okay, how do these cultures pan out? Individualistic versus collectivist. 20% of people will fall under the individualistic culture, whereas a full 80% fall under the collectivist culture. And these two cultures, if you read farther, you already know this, different countries are associated with different archetypes. Right at the top of the list under individualistic is the United States. Tends to be an individualistic society. And you can see the list of those countries that tend to be collectivist societies. Of course, every person within each society, there's going to be a lot of crossover, but that was very interesting information to have. Okay, we're going to take just a few moments here. If we were in a live PD and we were all together, we would take some time to talk this through as a group, but you're going to take a few seconds of think time, reflect upon the growing cultural diversity on your own campus. And our diversity in Wills Point may look very different than the diversity in communities just east of us and just west of us. What cultural differences are you seeing on our campuses? And how do these differences impact the relationship we have between staff members, even between leadership and among students? So if you would like to pause this presentation for a moment to think through those questions and how that affects your classroom, do that now. And when you're ready, click continue. Okay, if you do have students from other places, and that has been a part of the change in culture that you've seen, this is a fantastic tool that you can use. It's a cultural atlas, and you simply get to it by clicking anywhere on the globe. This will take you to a multitude of countries around the world and will give you very specific information on that culture. I actually investigated the United States culture, which is the only culture I have experience with, and I would say that I did learn some things. I believe it would be very important to use a tool like this if you have a student from an area that you're unfamiliar with. A lot of different customs, a lot of different norms, a lot of different just cultural activities will be outlined specifically in this cultural atlas. Fun tool to look at. Okay, we have a few brain rules to go over. We're going to go through these rather quickly. Brain rule 1. The brain seeks to minimize social threats and maximize opportunities to connect with others in the community. We want to have that connection. Brain rule 2, positive relationships keep our safety threat detection system in check. Having positive relationships, very important as the educator to develop those. Brain rule 3, culture guides how we process our information. Brain rule number 4, attention drives learning. We have to get their attention. Brain rule 5, all new information must be coupled with existing funds of knowledge in order to be learned. Connections, have to be able to make a connection. Build those bridges between information so that it connects. And brain rule 6, the brain physically grows through challenge and stretch, expanding its ability to do more complex thinking and learning. This made me think of Tammy Whitaker. She's always sharing ways to have our kids do new activities that grow and stretch the limits of their brain. Okay, we all need a bag of tricks when we talk about having schools that are culturally responsive. This quote, far from being a bag of tricks, culturally responsive teaching is a pedagogical approach firmly rooted in learning theory and cognitive science. So we have a list of items that we need to be aware of to be the best that we can be for our students. Number 1, on cultural awareness. What are some insights to your own awareness that you gained today? Did you learn something about your own culture that impacts your ability to teach in your classroom? What are you hoping to learn more about moving forward? Number 2, learning partnerships. Reimagining learning as a relationship or as a partnership that helps teachers. This is an important growth component to keep in mind. Number 3, information processing. How does the brain process information? So we got a lot of information about this today. We have to provide appropriate challenge and comprehensible input. New content needs to be processed with an oral tradition. We talk about styles of learning, and that is a real thing. Different people learn in different ways, so we have to provide multiple modes to the students. We must be able to connect new content to culturally relevant and prior knowledge, provide authentic processing opportunities, teach cognitive routines involving the brain's natural systems, and assess formatively with feedback. Feedback is very important so that adjustments can be made. Number 4, your learning community. Your classroom is a learning community. Regardless of the content area you teach, a place where students understand and experience learning as a process that belongs to them. Do you have images or posters in your room that reflect diversity in your subject area? This is a live link to posters that you are welcome to print and use. Does instruction focus on the strengths that you bring with them culturally to maximize their potential? And this also provides a link for you to some great resources about Hispanic learners and ways to bridge those. Okay, finally today, you have an option to choose from these 4 different articles related to culturally responsive teaching, and you will be choosing one of these 4. Once you have chosen one of these 4 articles, you will read it, study the contents, and then you will be completing the attached Google form and submitting that. Once you have read one of the articles and completed the Google form, which requires a summary of the article as well as how that article will impact your classroom, you will have completed today's culturally responsive teaching professional development session. Keep this slide number 42 in mind so that you can come back and choose your article and get to your Google link for the form that has to be completed. As we complete training, I want you to realize that I have attached some more forms through this Wakelet, some more resources and information that you can explore culturally responsive teaching in a more in-depth way. There are also some books here where you can see the author and the book title if you want to continue to explore culturally responsive teaching. This will conclude today's professional development session on culturally responsive teaching. There are additional slides within this Google slideshow that we will use if we are able to move forward with a face-to-face presentation time. But at this time, Once you have returned to slide number 42 in your Google Slides, you will have 4 active links to 4 different articles. Choose one only and complete the attached Google form. And once you've submitted that, you will receive credit for your time that you spent with me today in culturally responsive teaching.